Thanks for being here. My pleasure to introduce Corey Peterson and the 0001 car.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. I'm Corey Peterson. My friend Rex Marshall, he has accompanied me on this quest quite a bit, and we figured to streamline things a little bit for a presentation to you folks. Rex is going to ask me what he feels are pertinent questions that apply to the chase and the find of the car, and I'll respond to his questions if they aren't too complex, and give you a rundown. And if there's still questions after we're kind of finished with our presentation, feel free to ask whatever you choose to want to. So anyway, here's Rex Marshall.
All right, everybody, welcome out today. So these are kind of the top 20 questions off of the internet. When this car first surfaced, there was a lot of speculation and questions about its discovery. And so the first question is going to be, how long ago did you find out about this car and what were the circumstances?
This is a car that a fellow in South Carolina had. He knew it was an early car. He thought it was car number 2. He reached out to Lloyd Miller in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who has a restoration shop in Tulsa. Lloyd had done a complete restoration on 53 Corvette number 3. That was the car that Les Bieri, John Amgwart, and Howard Kirsch owned. This fellow in the Carolinas thought that it would be an appropriate place to get work started on this car. So he had the car shipped to Lloyd Miller's place, and Lloyd began a restoration on the car. The car was quite disassembled when Lloyd got it, and farther disassembled as he got launched on things. And they did a little bit of the restoration, stripped it down to the bare fiberglass, as you can see. And then the fellow that owned the car, his daughter took ill, and he shifted his focus away from the car, and the car just got sidelined in the shop in Tulsa and forgot about for 20 years. I learned about the car largely through John Amgwart, Lauren Lundberg, and Lloyd Miller, and we were all collectively researching the car to try and determine what it truly was.
All right, so next question is, what condition was the car in at that time? So it was completely apart. How long would you guess that the car had been apart?
I believe the car has been apart before the 70s. Now, I found a previous or a potential previous owner in the 70s out of Ohio. I have not been able to talk to or communicate with these people directly, but I suspect that it was probably owned by them, but I can't definitively say that because I've never talked to those folks. But they spoke of having the car in South Euclid, Ohio. They were members of the Classic Corvette Club, and there were postings in the Classic Corvette Club newsletter looking for parts for car number 001. And based on the request and search for the parts that they were looking for, like carburation and induction system, I suspect that the car didn't run back in the 70s, but that's just merely speculation, providing the car they're talking about is in fact this car, which I think it is.
So why did no one else recognize it for what it was? Many looked at the car but could not identify it.
There's some unusual characteristics about this car. This car number 1, was assigned the engineering number 3950 by Chevrolet Engineering. This was before Corvettes existed, much less than even serial numbering system for the Corvette had been officially out and about. This was in mid-June, June 16th, I believe, of 1953, when the order for purchase a Corvette car, any color with a radio and heater, assigned engineering number 3950. There was also an order just a day or so later for a second engineering car being assigned 3951. And the documents in retro determined that 3950 was car number 1 and 3951 was car number 2.
Is the frame stamped with the serial number?
If it is, I haven't been able to find it. The place where you would typically find a 53 frame number is on the pickup over the rear axle, just forward of the rear axle. I looked there, there was no frame number. Another characteristic that you look for on a 53 frame is for the brake line and the fuel line to run on the outboard side of the frame rail. There are holes in the X member of this frame, and the fuel line and the brake line run on the inboard side of the frame rail on the right side, which indicates to me it is not the original frame, and probably an engineering change along the way. But I have not seen, I did not lift the body off to see if there was a serial number that was obscured by the body.
Okay, when and how did the pertaining documents come out of GM?
This goes back some time. A General Motors attorney was called into Jim Perkins's office at Chevrolet. Jim Perkins, being at the helm of Chevrolet at the time, said, with all the pressure that I'm getting from the Corvette community, draft a letter that gives you access to any property, any building, any office, any archive, any filing cabinet within General Motors. And he said, please see what you can find in General Motors documents pertaining to these early Corvettes to get the Corvette community off of my back, because everybody's wanting to know. So Art Armstrong was the attorney. He went ahead, drafted this letter. Art told me that nobody's ever been granted this latitude within General Motors for access of anything and everything. Typically, if you went into any department's office and say, I want to get into your files, they'd say, get a requisition and come back and see me. But this letter gave him carte blanche to anything, anywhere within General Motors. And he said he wore blue jeans and t-shirts to work for 2 weeks and unearthed a wealth of General Motors documents that went into the archives of GM and to ultimately the Heritage Center. And with the proper questioning, you can access this stuff.
Okay, so the next question was, who had access to these documents once they were discovered?
Well, I did that. These documents, Art said that he wasn't at liberty to just say, I found this document, that document, whatever. But he was at liberty to answer specific questions. He said, for instance, if someone was to ask if you have a document pertaining to card number 003, I could answer that. And so I said, Art, do you have any documents pertaining to 003? He says, funny you should ask. I have some. And he made this kind of stuff available, and we were able to get to establish a rapport. John Ambort was able to access a wealth of documents, as was Lauren Lundberg, who also worked with me very closely on research of the car. Lauren has since passed away, but he was just a brilliant Corvette historian.
So what was your initial interest in studying the documents in the beginning?
My initial interest is the controversy about car number EX122, and I think you're all familiar with that car. Russ Sanders, General Motors performance engineer of the mid-50s, he truly believed that that car was the origin of EX52. But in back figuring after all these documents came to light, it ends up that that car was truly 3951 that started life as E53F001-002. The car was, it went into, let me say, Russ Sanders said, He pulled this car out of mothballs and sent it to styling and said, restore to show quality as a proving grounds demonstrator. Russ Sanders thought that he was getting the EX52 or the Motorama Waldorf Astoria show car and getting that one revived, when in fact the documents spelled out that it was in fact car number 2. Now, in the summer of '93, John Amgwert published a story in the Corvette Restorer magazine, and it spells out step by step each of these early cars. I think it was entitled Earliest Corvettes. If you haven't seen that article, there's a picture of Bill Mock in a white 65 or 60 Corvette on the cover of that issue, and it goes step by step on all of these early cars, and it's very, very accurate. I have read it time after time. There are the GM documents printed along with the text that John Amgwert wrote, and I have yet to find a mistake in any of it.
How old is John Amgwert?
Oh, John Amgwert is one of the founders of the National Corvette Restorer Society. He was the editor for the first 25 years of NCRS's existence. He is probably the brightest Corvette historian on earth, and his work is unsurpassed, and he would always study every story thoroughly till he believed in every word of it. If he ever published a mistake that he subsequently learned was not correct, he would always put up a follow-up correction in the next issue. John Amgwert, his NCRS membership number is 3.
So you refer to 3950 and 3951 when referencing this car in number 2. What does that mean?
The 3950, 3951, these are Chevrolet engineering numbers. 3 indicating the model year 53, 9 indicating a Corvette, and they started their engineering numbering sequence with number 50. So car number 1 was 3950, car number 2, 3951. Then we get into car number 3, and that's ES127-1. That's a General Motors corporate engineering number. Car numbers 4, 5, and 6 went to Wilmington, Delaware, to the DuPont estate, with car number 4 belonging to J. Spencer Weed. Car number 5, Crawford Greenwald, the CFO for the DuPont family. And car number 6 was Henry DuPont's car himself. Then we get into car number 7. That was engineering car number 3953. That's another Chevrolet engineering car. Then we get car number 8. Car number 8 was ES128-2, which is a General Motors corporate number. Car number 9 was ES129-3, another GM corporate number. I have files on each of these individual engineering cars, and I have found nothing on car number 10. Car number 11 is owned by a fellow in Akron, Ohio now. Car number 12 is in the state of Illinois. Car number 13 is in Arizona. I've tracked down where all of these cars are, and I won't bore you with their current locations.
All right, so what was your first clue to this car's identity?
After getting a host of documents regarding the changes that were done to the engineering cars, there was a talk about the floors in this car being lowered, or let me go back. There were trap doors cut in the floor was one description that somebody had deciphered. The cutting of the floors, and somebody called it aluminum doors in there. There was never any aluminum whatsoever. It's always been a fiberglass lowering of the floor. And I got looking at the General Motors documents. The car was taken directly off the assembly line, went into Chevrolet engineering. A team of engineers were called in. They admittedly declared that this car was rushed into production in a pretty hasty manner. Pick it apart, see where we fall short of it being a satisfactory production automobile. And I think there were 12 engineers who were carbon copied on this request, and they came into the experimental garage, looked the car over thoroughly. They went through 22 items that they listed on this first list of complaints of features that they didn't like on the car. Things such as a vibrating rear view mirror, and it was distorting the image as they were driving down the road. It wasn't a comfortable deal. Sitting too high in the seat, not enough room between the seat and the steering wheel to enter and exit the car. There was the fuel filler door was not giving good access to the gas cap. They didn't like that. Exposed rivets in the license plate recess in the trunk. The rivets were unsightly. And each of these items, among others, were addressed in this change order document. And then they made these changes, and they brought the engineers back into the experimental garage to look the changes over. What should we implement into production? What do we not worry about? What was a benefit? What wasn't? And all of those changes were present on this car.
So this is a little bit repetitious. So why could this not be some other 53? I remember when this first came out, many on the internet says you can't just screw a VIN tag to some random body and claim it's number one.
Well, I chose, when I learned all of these changes that had been done for 3950, I was convinced after inspecting this car, I would have Lloyd Miller go out and photograph features of the car for me, and I would have even some of the original factory GM photographs and run comparisons and draw conclusions from what I could see there. And back to the lowered floor, that was my first clinching indicator for me. I think it was line item number 10 where it said lower seat bolster 1.25 inches and free A point 3/4 of an inch. Well, I knew what lowering the seat bolster would be, build a shorter seat, which was obvious. But the free A point, and I got thinking about that. I got thinking about these lowered sections on either side of the seat, and free A point 3/4 of an inch. If you go any farther than 3/4 of an inch, you get into the X member of the frame, and so that's how far down they cut these two sections out under each driver and passenger side of the seat, and built a mold of this early coarse hand-woven fiberglass. And obviously the early crude fiberglass process was still in effect for these changes that they made. And they put molded panels beneath each seat, and it did lower the floor 3/4 of an inch. And I asked a General Motors retired design staff engineer friend of mine, I said, when you're in design, what is A point when it comes for a seat? He says, that's the starting point, the floor. I said, so free A point. He says, yeah, that would be lower the seat, and it spelled out 3/4 of an inch. And I drew that conclusion from that bit of information there.
So what was the final piece of the puzzle that convinced you?
I don't know that there was a definitive final piece of the puzzle. Everything was matching up, from the rivet removal inside the license plate recess. Initially, they riveted the striker box, is what the box that the striker attaches to had 12 rivets, 15 rivets, and they ended up 4 was enough to get it done after the complaint of those obvious rivets that showed through, and the later cars ultimately had less rivets exposed there. The one that was really a kicker is the gas filler box on this car. I looked at that, and it was typical of what you would see on a later 53 or a 54, 55 production type gas filler box and the gas door. The early 53 cars, you raise the gas lid, the lid folds into the cavity of the gas filler box, and it obstructs access to the gas cap itself. You get to it, but it still was a bit awkward. And this is the later type that lifts up and over the rear fender to give you better access to the gas cap. Well, I found a document that called for install newly designed gas filler box and hinge cover assembly on car number 3950, and the work order and the time of the installation and the work was done on that, and that really locked it in for me at that point.
So why could this not be a second design gas filler box that was grafted into this car?
You look at the fiberglass composite, once again, is the woven, hand-laid fiberglass composite that you see exposed everywhere on this car. It was that fiberglass process that was rapidly being changed and evolving into a newer process by Molded Fiberglass in Ashtabula, Ohio. And this was, in fact, the very early design of fiberglass, and it's evident if you look inside the gas filler box.
Along those same lines, why couldn't this car be a modified body built to match the work orders?
I got pictures of this car from 25 years ago from the previous owner, and he had photographed the car pretty detailed, and he had made I was able to see in these photographs that this stuff was done 20 years before I ever had a chance to lay eyes on it. I am convinced that it was done by the factory and not by Al's body shop.
Okay, what obstacles did you have to overcome to obtain this car?
Getting approval from Jan. It was interesting because the fellow in the Carolinas that owned the car before me, a very pleasant man, his focus shifted with the loss of his daughter, and he just, in essence, sidelined the car. He lost touch with Lloyd Miller, who was the owner of the shop, and I reached out to Lloyd and I said, "Have you got ownership of the car?" He says, "Technically I probably do, but I can't do that to the previous owner." And he gave me a contact number. I reached out to the previous owner and I made a deal to buy from each of them. I had to buy the car twice to keep everybody happy, but I wanted everybody happy. I needed everybody's input from a positive sort of a way to help me on the quest of finding out the bottom line of it all.
All right, like I said, when this car first came to light, everybody was going, well, it's common knowledge that the first two Corvettes were destroyed. Number one was burned, and then number two was disassembled. So where did that story come from? How do you explain that?
I'm still looking for the origin of these stories. I hear these stories from urban legend. It seems that the general consensus of the Corvette community is the first 5 cars were destroyed or whatever. I have specifically looked for destruction documents about anything on any of these cars, and the only definitive destruction document that I can find is the burn test on EX52. EX52 is the first Motorama show car originally built for the Waldorf Astoria show in January of 1953. It calls for the car to be separate the body from the chassis, send the body to the proving grounds for a burn test, assign 857 to the chassis, send it to styling, and stretch it for the Waldorf Nomad Corvette project. And so the frame, the chassis for EX52 was the chassis that was modified to build the Corvette Nomad on. The body went to the proving grounds. I have a several page document with a step-by-step progression on how flammable these fiberglass bodies are. They tried to start a fire with a 12-volt battery without any success. They went to with a 6-volt battery. They went to a 12-volt battery to see if they could arc it, spark it, get it to light on fire. Couldn't get it done. The bottom line, they tried a host of different procedures to get the car to burn. They finally just had to dump gas on it and throw a match on it, and that did get it to burn, but it wasn't a very scientific test by that point when you get reading through it. But that is the only destruction document that I can find of any of the early Corvettes being destroyed. They took EX53, which was the second Motorama show car, and EX53, that car got its body swapped onto 856, which was the test mule car that you see pictures of at the proving grounds. The car with the black wheels, the dog dish hubcaps, no chrome, no trim, holes drilled in the lower front fenders for exhaust or air or for engine heat to escape. That was such a ragged looking car, they decided that if they took a show car body and put it on the test mule car when dignitaries came to the proving grounds, they're not testing what looked to be a really crude piece of junk. It looked like the real deal car. And that's where those two bodies were.
And the final question is, being number one, how could no one know of its existence before now? Certainly someone knew back in the 60s or 70s and would have announced it to the world. I know where number one is. How could such an important discovery be kept a secret?
Well, I was onto a clue with my research, but it was only after all of these documents came to light that Art Armstrong, the retired General Motors attorney, had unearthed. And with those documents being available to some of us, there was a team of us that were working on what could the origin of this car possibly be. And Lauren Lundberg, John Ambwort, and myself, along with Lloyd Miller, we were quite intense about our research, and we collectively put the pieces together. I went ahead and I tried the process of elimination. I know the origin and the whereabouts of car number 14, number 13, number 12, number 11, number 10 I could not find anywhere. There's a possibility that George McGriff, one of the plant workers, had car number 10. Haven't been able to verify that. Car number 9, I know where that is in Indiana. Car number 8 is in Michigan, and I know where that is. Car number 7, I suspect, is the green car that was just finished up, the 2151 SO car that has the fish gills in the front fenders, the 55 passenger car grill. It was a styling exercise for a 55 proposal where it has a backward hood scoop for a license plate display. I think you folks have seen that car. That was, I believe that car started life as car number 7 in spite of it being titled as 542092, I believe. Car number 6, I know where that is in Pennsylvania. Car number 5 is just resurfaced again back in Oklahoma. Car number 3 is in the Dave Ressler collection, who has just recently passed away, and that's still in Missoula, Montana. Car number 2 is in existence in New Jersey, and this is car number 1. Yeah, but people say, when you first walk up on a car, what conclusions can you draw? Well, I think you can safely walk up to this car and say it's a Corvette. It's an early Corvette. It's a 53 through 5 Corvette. Well, let's start looking at some characteristics. Does it have the flipper top type of molding, or flipper moldings for the first design convertible top, or is it a clock spring type top? It's the earlier design. So you know it's a mid 54 or older. Okay, well, let's look at the fiberglass makeup. All this hand-woven fiberglass that you can see obviously throughout the car. That's typical 50 and occasionally very early 54. So we've narrowed it down to a late 54, or a very late 53, early 54 transition time or earlier. And you walk up to the rear valance panel. Where the rear valance panel and the bulkhead turns up and into the trunk, there's reliefs that were incorporated for the shackles to work into a little bit later on. The first 100 or so 53 cars did not have those reliefs. This car does not have those reliefs. And then, of course, I looked at the gas filler box door, and that had been changed. But these were all clues that I used to zero in on it being a very early car. And then I started using all the General Motors documents that I could get. I've got a file on 3950, 3951, ES 127. I've got files on the DuPont estate cars, and nothing matched up except for the documentary changes on 3950. Oh, yes, yeah. On the early cars, the one-piece hand-laid floor pan. This was a bit of an awkward process in the fiberglass plant, that this large mold with all these technicians with a cup full of catalyzed resin and paint brushes for a team of guys that are tripping over each other to lay up this one-piece floor was pretty intense and awkward to get done. And so they decided to, after about the first 12 or 14 cars, they were doing up wheel houses that were precast, spare tire well tubs that were precast, transmission tunnels, rocker panels that had been precast, and then they would band-aid those all together with fiberglass band-aids in essence, kind of, for no better terms of crudeness. And this car is one of the one-piece hand-laid floor pans that narrows it down to where it would have been one of the first 12 or 15 cars.
So out of those 12 or 15 cars, how many were accounted for?
All but 7. All but initially my eligibility pool was 1, 7, or 10. So I'd already ruled out every other car. I had to rule out number 7 and number 10, and the engineering work orders for those cars did not match up, but 3950 certainly did.
Any questions?
What was the powertrain? How was that? The engine and stuff when you got the car?
When I got the car, there was no engine in the car. And this engine, I found an engine in Houston. A friend of mine had the engine. It was a correct 481 block, an appropriate date, and I had the proper information on what the stamp pad was. So I just did what we would consider a restoration engine, and it's all new and it works good. I think it works good anyway.
So you got the title. Does it have any numbers on the title?
E53F001001.
Anything that ties it to the 001?
Yeah, the serial number.
So it is on the title.
Yes, it is. Yeah, yeah, and it's on the door jamb. Yeah, it's just not on the frame.
Has it ever had paint?
Yes. Yeah, it was painted, and when it got to Lloyd Miller's shop, he stripped the paint off down to the bare fiberglass, started some of the repairs on the body, which were limited, but there's been some repair work done on the left rear and on the right front. And I chose not to do anything more than just put the car together so everyone could see how it was when I found it, and that I haven't tried to sugarcoat anything.
What's your plan for it?
Sell it to you, and I'm on it. No, I just want to share it with the Corvette community. I have 3 complete restorations apart right now. I put this car together to start, run, and drive for John Amgwert's induction ceremony into the National Corvette Museum Hall of Fame. John wanted to have the car on the stage for his induction ceremony presentation. He called me and he says, do you think you could get the car together enough to where we could push it into the museum or onto the stage? And I said, John, if we're going to do that, I'm going to drive the car from the trailer to the museum. And he was dumbfounded that I was able to get that done, and I was quite surprised that I could too. I wouldn't trust the car across the parking lot, but I will take it from the trailer and into the garage and that kind of a deal. It does start, run, and drive, and stop. But I don't know if it shifts into second gear, into high gear. Haven't ever gone that fast. Yeah.
Question. Are you then looking to donate that to the National Corvette Museum at some point?
No. No, I would have, but that's another story. No,
Okay,
no.
Just curious.
It's our children's inheritance.
Yeah.
What about this patch on the right rear?
Oh, okay. You're speaking of this. There is a corresponding one there on the left side, but it's covered with body filler. You can't see it. One of the complaints is that the exhaust that exited typically in this reverse curve relief, it was staining the car. The exhaust would backwash onto the car, and they tried various different exhaust extensions, lengthening, turning them down, whatever, and then they came up with routing them out the center bumper to see what that might do. And I've got work orders showing this to be done on car number 3953, and then list other cars that this treatment to be done with. And I found photographs of at least 3 cars, maybe 4, that have had this exhaust change treatment. But I haven't specifically got to the bottom of which ones actually did and didn't receive that. But if you look at the back side of these filler plugs, once again, this is the crude hand-laid woven fiberglass, and they are molded panels with flanges that fit from the back side nicely and glass in. It wasn't just, put some newspaper over it and spread some fiberglass and resin over it. It was sophisticatedly done back when it was, to the standards back then anyway. Yes, sir.
How much would you say percentage-wise is original to the car?
Certainly not the engine. A lot of the chrome is not. And it's hard to say just what is. The frame is not. Certainly the body is. Some of the hardware, but specifically what, and it's where engineering has evolved. And what is original to the car? Is it original to the car after Chevrolet engineering got done with it? Or is it only original to the car to when it rolled off the assembly line and then went into engineering? Because they started changing all kinds of things. I've got a work order calling for a change of the convertible top. Bill, you have the original convertible top. And it was a very poor design, as you will attest to, but it's neat. Don't misunderstand me. It's neat.
And you'd like to have it.
Yeah.
But we're not going to third mortgage the house to do it.
Anyway, so at what point do you call it original or not original to the car? If the car ever does get restored, I am going to leave all of the engineering modifications that I have a paper trail that describe on the car and not destroy that part of history with the restoration. Anything else, anyone?
So when did this one come off the line exactly?
June 30th, 1953.
The reason I say, I was telling him earlier, my dad probably helped assemble this.
I thank him and I thank you. Yeah.
Hey, I wasn't born till July 20th.
Oh, so it's all hearsay to you.
The story behind that, I did not know that until after Dad retired.
Well, what was his name?
Glenn Dalton.
Okay.
Glenn F. Dalton.
Great.
He worked down at Union in St. Louis. He was up there to learn how to put it together or whatever. And
I see.
that's all I know.
Was he at the Flint plant
Yes.
prior to going to St.
Yes.
Louis? Okay.
They
Well,
shipped him from St.
Our
Louis
next
up
and
there.
final seminar. For
well,
the
thank you,
weekend
Mr. Dalton.
will be
Yeah,
at
I
1
appreciate
o'clock.
your
It's about
father's
25
input on
minutes
this.
from now.
Yeah.
The early days of Corvette
Well, if
gathering.
there is no more questions about anything, we'll wind it down. Thank you, folks, for coming and listening and tolerating my presentation.